When it comes to the Manning family, you understand that this is a family that has historic ties to the game of football, all predominantly at one position. And Arch Manning is the most sought after high school recruit in recent memory. Some have said he's the most sought after recruit in the history of college football. And the genesis of the story was going back and comparing the recruitment of his uncles, Peyton and Eli, to what Arch is dealing with at the moment. The Athletic has done a superb job of covering recruiting and has done a pretty good job following Arch's path up until this point. And so many schools across the country are kind of waiting at bated breath to figure out what Arch is going to do. And I thought it would be fascinating to go back in time, in Peyton's case, basically 30 years, in Eli's case, 25, to compare the attention from a media perspective that Peyton and Eli got. Remember that this is before the star system was even a thing. So, if you wanted to go back and look and see what star ranking Peyton Manning had, he never had one because it didn't exist at this point. And you compare that to what Arch is dealing with now, where he is basically inundated on a day-to-day basis from a social media perspective, from a media request perspective, from coaches across the country. It is interesting that it's simultaneously nothing alike, but if you look back at the media reports, the stories, the takeouts that Peyton and Eli kind of dealt with, it's eerily kind of similar at the same time. The toughest part of the story for sure was trying to get Peyton and Eli to talk to me. And I understand that they are now a little more media friendly than they have been in recent years with their Monday Night Football show. But what they decided to do is ultimately, bow out and do their very best to make sure that the attention on Arch is minimized as much as possible. Coach Cutcliffe was great. He was essential to the storytelling process because, as he mentioned, as everyone mentioned that I talked to, David's the only one that has been able to land two Mannings in the history of college football recruiting. And getting Coach Cutcliffe was essential to the story because he was able to go back and share stories of, being in the Manning house on First Street, New Orleans, and basically peeling off from Archie and Olivia, who he left with Philip Fulmer, and was able to go into another room and basically just get to know Peyton one-on-one. And if you're an offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach, as David was at the time, you want to be able to develop that sort of rapport with a recruit. And as David said in the story, he wasn't being brash or bragging, but he said, as soon as we left their house on First Street, I knew that Peyton was going to come to Tennessee. I really enjoyed Philip Fulmer's story of how he remembers finding out that Peyton was going to choose to come to Tennessee. As the story goes, the phone on First Street in New Orleans was just being inundated with calls because everybody knew the Manning's house number. So whether it was people, locally or people, nationwide, people just kept calling. So what Peyton and Archie decided to do was go check into a hotel for a couple of nights. The decision was really weighing heavily on him. He needed to basically shut off from the world, get away. I mean, there are stories, old newspaper stories of Archie driving to the hotel and still having his car phone, because for people who don't remember, there were car phones at one point. His car phone was getting lit up because people were trying to find out where Peyton was going. So they check into a hotel. They eventually, Peyton eventually makes his decision that he's going to go to Knoxville, and Philip Fulmer finds out about 2 a.m. while he's in Pennsylvania on a recruiting trip. And the way he recounted it to me was he screamed in elation so loud that he remembers other people on the floor that he was in being woken up by just how loud and excited of a reaction he had. Recruiting back then is nowhere near what it is now. There was no social media, there was no internet. Everybody was basically either calling people on the phone or doing face-to-face visits. I mean, you Google Arch Manning and you find, all of these very theoretical takes on where he might go, even though a lot of it doesn't necessarily have a lot of merit. He has like 20 fake Instagram accounts dedicated to him by fans all across the country. This is stuff that is very odd for a 17-year-old kid to have to deal with. But I guess the beauty of his existence is he's a Manning, and they've been through this plenty of times when Archie was kind of shielding Peyton and Eli from the onslaught of attention when it came to recruiting. I think Cooper, his wife Ellen, Archie's mom, and then Archie, Olivia, Peyton, and Eli, so on and so forth, have been able to do that for Arch and try to help him live as normal of a life as possible, even in circumstances that don't necessarily allow it.